Alright, you guys probably know if you've watched this channel that I've always been a pretty big critic of Gearbox paddles. Their previous paddles have never really lived up to what the high-end polymer paddles have been. Well, that all changes with this paddle because Raphael has finally made me eat my words. The new Gearbox Pro paddles have a price of $275, and unfortunately, I was not able to get a discount code for you guys. However, if you find this review helpful and you plan to buy one, using my link in the description does help support the channel and is greatly appreciated. There are 4 models in the new Pro line. They have the Pro Elongated paddles, which come in a power and control model, and then they have the Fusion, which is a new shape that Gearbox is experimenting with. Instead of making a standard shaped paddle, Gearbox opted to take an elongated paddle and remove half an inch from the head without adding anything to the width. We'll talk more about that later in this video. The Fusion also comes in a control and power model as well. The things that these paddles have in common are all of them are 14mm, have a 5.5 inch handle length, 4-inch grip circumference, weigh 8 ounces, and have a raw carbon fiber face with the SST core that Gearbox is known for. I have to say, I'm so glad to see Gearbox is finally using a raw carbon fiber face. For the longest time, Gearbox insisted that they didn't need a rough surface to get good spin, but I always disagreed with that. While grit is not the only factor that goes into getting great spin, and I think Gearbox proved that with their previous paddles, I think it's very clear that having grit on top of that type of core is only going to give you better results. Now that Gearbox is using it, it's clear how powerful the SST core plus a raw carbon fiber face combo can be. All of the models I received tested in the 2000 RPM range, which is in the elite tier for spin in Pickleball right now. Of course, we can't do a Gearbox review without talking about their incredible durability. Gearbox has always been in a class of their own when it comes to durable pickleball paddles. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, but Gearbox is one of the only companies that can effectively charge as high as they do for a pickleball paddle because they actually last a really long time. Their cores aren't made of polymer, so they don't go dead the same way, and a lot of the spin has come from the core in the past, so the grit wasn't a massive deal. Now, I will say, now that Gearbox is using a carbon fiber face, it's more likely that the grit is going to die on the paddle before anything else does. So do be aware that while the whole paddle is very durable, the grit probably isn't going to be much more durable than other raw carbon fiber paddles that we've seen in the past. But who knows, maybe with the SST core that won't even really matter because you'll still be able to get a lot of spin from the core. Their quality control for weight has been absolutely exceptional. Most companies in pickleball you can expect to have a wide variance. Gearbox has always been dead on or within 0.1 ounce of the advertised weight, which is really impressive. The swing weights of my paddles came in as following: 119 for the power elongated, 120 for the control elongated, 110 for the Fusion power, and 112 for the Fusion control. These fall right in line with most elongated and standard shaped paddles on the market, so there's no huge surprises here. A nearly 10-point difference is a very substantial change for most people, so if hand speed is your biggest priority, you'll probably want to look into the Fusion shape. Just be aware that it's going to come at the cost of the sweet spot, which we'll talk about more later in this video. While we're on the topic of durability, I do want to talk about this edge that's wrapping the Gearbox paddle. This is probably here for 2 reasons. 1, to protect the edge from scratches, but 2, as far as I'm aware, it's still difficult to make a raw carbon fiber edgeless paddle without having imperfections in the edges. So this is likely covering up those as well. There's not really any downside to this wrap on the paddle, I just thought I would address it in case people were curious what it might be doing. Now before we move on, I do just want to say that in this review, I'm going to be primarily focusing on the Gearbox Pro Power Elongated model, because in my opinion, of the 4 new paddles, this one absolutely takes the cake and is the most impressive and different paddle of the 4. I will be talking about the others later in this video, but this is one that I think everyone will have their eye on. Paddles have been getting more and more powerful this year. In this year, we've experienced thermoformed paddles, EVA foam paddles, and core crushed paddles. And of those 3, only 2 of those have been legal. The new Gearbox Pro Power Elongated literally hits at the speed of EVA foam, but it's legal. In John Q's speed test, he clocks the EVA foam paddles between 58 and 59 miles per hour. I tested my Gearbox Pro Power and it came in at 57 miles an hour. For your own reference, the Carbon 1X 14mm was 55 miles an hour, the Engage Pursuit MX 6.0 was 54, and the 6.0 Double Black Diamond was 51 miles per hour. Tests are great and all, but when I really realized how hard this paddle hits was when everyone I played with would always ask me after the first driver overhead if the paddle was delaminated. I cannot tell you guys how many people were flinching at me hitting an overhead or drive, or just asking what on earth is wrong with that paddle. During my testing of paddles this year, I have never had more people ask me about a paddle than I have this Gearbox. Okay, so it's one thing for me to just tell you guys this paddle hits really hard. There are a lot of paddles we can say that about, but the Gearbox just feels different. So I tried to come up with something that was a little bit different to help you understand just how hard this thing is hitting. One of the areas I noticed people would react the hardest was when I was at the net and I would just hit a little flick and it would pelt them right in the chest. And I was like, okay, my flick's normally not that good. No one ever talks about it. Why is it so different with this paddle? Like, how much faster is it really coming off the paddle? So I did a test where I filmed in 240 frames per second and I calculated how long is it taking for the ball to leave my paddle on a flick and then get to the other side. And the long story short is, with the Double Black Diamond, it was taking about 0.3 seconds to go from my paddle on a flick to the other side of the kitchen line. And you're like, okay, that's pretty fast, a third of a second to react to the ball. And then I took the Gearbox. And the Gearbox was frequently 0.2 seconds to get to the other side. And now you might be asking yourself, 0.2 to 0.3, like that can't be that big of a difference, could it? Well, where it becomes interesting is if you take 0.3 seconds and 14 feet to figure out how many feet per second that ball is traveling, at 0.3 seconds, it's about 46 feet per second. Okay, that's quick. But at 0.2 seconds, it's about 70 feet per second. And keep in mind, this is just at a flick where I'm only using my wrist to just flick the ball really quickly. This is not a full swing where you can really generate some serious power. And the other thing that I want to stress to you guys is the amount of effort it takes to create that power. On the Double Black Diamond, I feel like I'm having to really exert a lot of force to make that speed happen. On the Gearbox, I'm just reaching in and kind of effortlessly flicking. Like, I'm not having to go insane with it to generate some of this speed. So I think not only is there a difference in how fast the ball's coming, but it's also the amount of energy you're having to exert to make it happen. And I think that's part of what catches people so off guard. With the Double Black Diamond, I think people can sit there and kind of watch the windup and expect it to come relatively quick. With the Gearbox, I'm just kind of holding my wrist there and just popping my wrist, and all of a sudden it just hits him in the chest. And we actually filmed this so you guys could kind of get an idea of what the difference is. So here's the Double Black Diamond, and you can see my brother is not struggling to react to this at all. In fact, it feels like he has a bunch of time to react. Now, here's the Gearbox, and you can see I just absolutely pelt my brother in the chest. And this was a common theme when playing with people in this paddle. I think when someone's that stretched in and only moving their wrist that little, people don't expect the ball to travel as quickly and it catches them off guard. Now here's another interesting view. I took the Double Black Diamond clip and overlaid it on top of the Gearbox clip, and you can see just how much faster that ball in slow motion is getting to my brother compared to the Double Black Diamond. I really wish my camera had audio when recording in slow motion, because the reaction to him getting hit was actually pretty funny. So anyways, all of that to say, guys, this paddle hits very hard, and I hope some of those numbers help quantify in your head how little effort you have to put in to make the ball go very fast. Now here's the wild part. Usually when you have a paddle with the characteristics that I just described, the control suffers significantly, and that's not the case with this paddle. Now sure, if you put it against an extremely control-oriented paddle like a Selkirk Lab 003 or a Ronbus R1.16, it's not going to be able to reset quite like those. But it somehow manages to have very solid touch despite being one of the hardest hitting paddles I've ever used. The paddle has this firmer, plush feel that isn't as jarring as some of the stiff thermoformed paddles. It made me feel really in control of my dinks. The area I did notice having a harder time was on resets though. If you watch these two clips of me using the Gearbox Pro Power and then the Gearbox Pro Control, it's very clear that my resets are much more solid and unattackable on the control. You really have to loosen up your hands on the Pro Power to get the same type of reset. So I don't think it's impossible to dial this in, but it will be more difficult than the Control Elongated. I don't often mention singles in my reviews, but the Gearbox Pro Power Elongated is worth talking about. With its extreme amounts of power, high spin, and still reasonable touch, I think it's one of the most elite singles paddles you can buy right now. You can watch some of these singles highlights right here to see for yourself. I really wonder if Gearbox is using any type of EVA foam in the Pro Power. They make similar sounds, the feel of the sweet spot rebounds kind of like EVA, and when you rip it, the dwell time feels huge. It feels like a subdued version of EVA for a tournament paddle. It has a very bouncy feel when you hit the center, which is not a trait that Gearboxes have had in the past. I will say, I think this is Gearbox's closest paddle to something that feels like a polymer paddle. While it's still different and unique, this is much closer than the previous generation paddles, which all felt like a board when you hit them. The Pro Power is also pretty quiet. I don't think I would go as quiet as EVA foam, but when you hit it, the sound it makes isn't as loud or poppy as other power paddles, and I think that catches people off guard. This is actually something that Gearbox even puts in their marketing. They call it Quiet Tech Sound Technology, which, really quick, really? Quiet Tech Sound Technology? I don't know, that title sounds redundant to me, but anyways, Gearbox claims that this technology creates a lower decibel, lower frequency sound, and in my experience, I would agree with this. It's certainly not silent, but I think you will catch people off guard the first few times you play against them with this paddle. While I did prefer the elongated Pro Power, I do want to give you my thoughts on the Pro Control as well. The best way I can describe the elongated control is much more dense feeling. The Pro Power feels very bouncy and launches the ball, and the Pro Control feels like it effortlessly stops the ball. I had an absolute breeze resetting with the Control Elongated. The feel reminds me much more of older Gearboxes where it's stiff and feels kind of like a board. What changed to me is that it's much more dense feeling. The older Gearboxes felt a lot more hollow. Everything related to the soft game was very easy. But of course, you can expect that when the power goes down. And man, do you lose a significant amount of power. Hand battles feel so much more difficult to get ahead in. If you can generate your own power, then the Pro Control is awesome. But as someone who has a hard time generating power, this was a deal breaker for me. I didn't find the Pro Control to be a tolerable paddle until I added the lead. In fact, it took me multiple sessions to start using it because every time I picked it up, I wanted to put it back down. The lead played a very big role in making this paddle something that was enjoyable to use. Off-center shots were not very forgiving, and it was very obvious when you missed the sweet spot. All of these new Gearboxes still have incredibly low twist weights. They fall into the top 15 lowest paddles I've ever tested. What was surprising is that the sweet spot did feel improved from prior Gearbox paddles, but that also isn't saying much because, in my opinion, those were some of the worst sweet spots on the market. In the new Pro line, the control models felt the worst for the sweet spot, and the power versions did feel much improved compared to prior generations. So out of the box, don't expect great sweet spot performance, but do expect that it will be better than prior Gearboxes. The Fusion shapes had the worst sweet spot in my opinion, and I never found a time where it didn't feel like I was hitting a bad spot on the paddle. In my opinion, of the 4 new paddles, the Pro Power Elongated had the best sweet spot of all of them. I could probably use that paddle without lead and not have too many complaints, but I do think it gets better once you add the lead tape. Okay, let's talk about the new Fusion shape. Gearbox decided to try something new by not increasing the width of their paddles from an elongated paddle, but instead removing half an inch from the top. This creates a narrow, standard-shaped paddle. To be completely honest with you, I don't like this shape. The benefit that you gain on the Fusion models is the faster hand speed since it's shorter, which, if you watch my channel, you know I care a lot about lower swing weight. However, I felt the elongated versions played so much better that I would gladly put up with the slightly slower hand speed to have the better sweet spot and power of the Pro Power Elongated. So my thought is that you get some of the cons of an elongated paddle without the pros of a standard shaped paddle. And as someone who has really started to enjoy standard shaped paddles, the Fusion was a pretty big letdown to me. I love when companies try something new, but I really wish Gearbox had also offered a standard shaped option. I'm sure the sweet spot would have been incredible, and combined with faster hands would have been an absolutely killer option. I hope Gearbox will consider releasing that shape in the future. So the sweet spot isn't great out of the box, but lead tape does drastically improve it and makes me stop thinking about the issue altogether. On the power model, a friend of mine added lead at the throat, and as soon as he did this, it took the paddle from, dang, this is really good, to, holy crap, I can't put this thing down. On the power model, I did briefly experiment with some lead tape at the head to see what it felt like, and it did fix this more dead area at the top that I kept experiencing, but the power went up so much that I just couldn't reset the ball anymore. The balls were just going way too high, and I just didn't find that acceptable for my game. So the added power and small fix of that little dead area at the top wasn't worth the trade-off. I went back and took that lead off, and the paddle's been perfectly fine for me. For the elongated control, I added 4 3-gram strips to the side, and this made the paddle feel much more solid and less jarring with the sweet spot. The paddle became significantly more usable for me, but still didn't have the put away power that I wanted, so I didn't end up preferring this one. On the Fusions, I tried adding lead at the throat and at the head since there was more swing weight to work with, but no amount of lead got these paddles to a state that I was fully satisfied with. The elongated versions have strictly been better in every regard for my play except for hand speed. So to summarize my thoughts, the Fusions were not worth trying in my opinion. I don't think everyone will have the same experience as me, but I was completely content leaving the Fusions alone. I couldn't find any setup that made me think they were advantageous over the elongated version, and that comes from someone who cares a lot about faster hand speed. When it came to the elongated paddles, the power was the most exciting by a long shot. I think the control is a great paddle and I loved it for my resets and blocks, but it didn't strike me as anything new or really exciting. If you're a player who can generate a ton of power with your body, you might love that one, but I can't and didn't prefer it. If you didn't like Gearbox in the past, I think it's highly unlikely that the control model is going to sway you. Now, when it comes to the power version, this is the paddle that I think everyone should try, especially if you can try it with the lead setup that I recommend. I have never seen a paddle get more reactions on court than I have this Gearbox. Several pros messaged me asking how on earth it could even be legal after they tried it, and honestly, I'd be surprised if this didn't become the most challenged paddle in all of pickleball. The only issue with that is that Gearbox doesn't have a lot of high-level pros, so it'll be interesting to see if non-signed pros start gravitating toward this paddle. With pro players complaining all year about deflection on thermoformed paddles, I think they're gonna complain a lot more when they see this one. With how hard this thing hits, I truly wonder how it's even legal. In fact, part of me wonders if it's even good for a paddle to hit this hard. Being on the other side of this Gearbox when an overhead goes up or playing against a truly skilled banger is terrifying when they have the Gearbox Pro Power. You guys know how much I love my 6-0 double black diamond. It's been my favorite paddle for the majority of this year, and for good reason. I think it's one of the best you can buy right now. And this Gearbox is the first paddle to truly make me consider switching away from it. There's been plenty of really good paddles this year, but none of them were as tempting to switch to as this Gearbox is. The only thing that has me debating whether I'll switch or not is my resets. but I think I can dial those in with enough time. I don't think I ever thought I would say that I'm considering switching to a Gearbox paddle. So that should tell you how good I think this paddle is. Gearbox's issue has always been that their paddles were subpar for the technology that they were offering. And this is the first time that I think Gearbox truly has an elite paddle combined with their innovative design features. So yes, I highly recommend this paddle, and I would call it Pickleball Studio approved. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to click like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video.